Well, UFC 258 is not that far away. February 13th, it'll be back at the UFC Apex facility in Las Vegas, Nevada, and it will be headlined by existing champion Kamaru Usman defending his title against number one contender Gilbert Burns. Well, why is that relevant for our next guest? He knows them pretty well. Of course, he is a UFC Hall of Famer as well as a training partner for these guys down there in South Florida. It's my friend and yours. It is Rashad Evans. Hi, Rashad. How are you?
What's going on, LT, man? Just making it happen here in South Florida, man. We got a cold front, so it's getting kind of chilly out here.
Yeah,
A cold
you had
front.
to put on shoes instead of flip flops. Was that what happened?
Yeah, put on a jacket. I mean, people walk around here bundled up like it's the wintertime for real, like up north. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, BC got it the worst of the three of us. We only had a few inches of snow, but it's not so bad. We can still get out there and
Ooh.
do stuff. All right, but we still have some time that I want to spend here talking about UFC 258, welterweight headlining clash. Let's start today and talk about Kamaru Usman. That's sort of really where I want to focus this to begin things. When did you first meet Kamaru? What is your first experience training with him?
I met Kamaru Usman when I was training for Rampage in 2009, and I had an injury, a hamstring injury, and I really couldn't do much but just drill most of the time. And they brought him in to train with me. Muhammad Lawal brought him in to train with me, and we were supposed to be going light, but then he started to, up the pace, and it was my first time going with him. And at the time, he was training at the Olympic Training Center. So I was like, there's no way in hell I'm gonna let this little dude coming from the Olympic Training Center raise his leg on me, not Rashad Evans. So we went at it. And he remembers it differently, but I got at him pretty bad that day.
That day is well, certainly he's a smaller guy, but that's interesting. So was Lawal at ATT at the time? He was recommending someone for you over at the, I guess at the time was Black Zillions.
No, he wasn't actually. It wasn't the Black Zillions yet. This is back when I was at the Jackson's gym, and
Okay.
I was training in Denver, and Muhammad Lawal was, I think he was still over at in San Diego, so he was like in transition as well too.
Okay. All right. So how did you guys both make your way to South Florida then? How did that work?
So once I left the Jacksons team, I started my own team. I wanted to have some training partners. Actually, I didn't even want to have a team. I just wanted to bring some people in to help me train for my fight. And I remembered how good Kamaru was. I just remember how like he brought me back to just basic wrestling and just fundamental wrestling, not MMA wrestling where you just get into bad habits because the guy you're going against doesn't really have the technique. So then over time, your skills of actually doing the move all the way through, it deteriorates. I got back to my wrestling base back in college. And I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to win these fights, I need to be able to drill and have somebody who can drill like that kid I trained with, Usman.
When you say your skills deteriorate, it's interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way exactly, but like as your pro career progressed, how much pure wrestling did you do in training? Meaning like two guys might even strap on wrestling shoes and just sort of wrestle under wrestling rules.
We did the wrestling and training and MMA, but it's different because they're not from the college wrestling background. They're not from the wrestling background, so they have MMA wrestling, and there's techniques and there's moves that you can do because they're not so efficient in wrestling yet, But when you go against guys at the higher level, that's all they do is wrestling. You got to really break down all the steps and do it correctly in order to get the finish. And after a while, after you start training with MMA guys, and you, I guess, in a sense, starts cutting corners on your finishes and takedowns, your wrestling starts to get worse when you go against people who can actually wrestle.
All right, so let's get to Kamaru's strengths here. One of the things that's kind of amazing to me is the guy doesn't have an ounce of fat on him. I don't know how he does it. Is there anything other than to say that it's genetic, A, and then B, he just works out like an animal? Like, but you guys all work out like animals. He really is quite special in that regard.
No, he really is. I really haven't met anybody with the work ethic like Kamaru Usman. Like this dude is constantly working out, and he's even when he's not like in training mode, he'll just bust out a deck of push-ups or a deck of push-ups on like a leaning surface, like a countertop or something. He's always doing something. He's always making sure that his body just doesn't fall too far from just being at that ripped physique. But I mean, he does have an amazing genes as well too, and he eats pretty decent as well too. He doesn't eat a lot of crazy food. He has discipline in the diet. He's a very disciplined fighter, like a disciplined person in general. Like when he first moved down to South Florida, I had to kind of break him out of his discipline a bit because he was grinding too hard, and you only can grind for so long before it just breaks. And I said, you got to have balance. So I taught him a little balance, maybe not the right kind of balance, but I taught him balance.
So some balance is better than no balance. I'll go that far. We kind of know his strengths at this point as casual observers, just due to the fact that there's a lot of tape on him. His fights tend to go a little bit longer. How would you describe, though, his style of wrestling? When you think about the different kinds of types there are, like he's not a Yoel Romero type. What kind
Right.
is he?
Kamaru's a chain wrestler. He's going to go for one takedown and wait for you to defend it, and then he's going to go to the next one. But he's always like 2 or 3 steps ahead, and he's a dog for the takedown. When most people give up on a takedown, that's when he's going to find a new way to attack and new way to mix it up so it feels like a different takedown. He gets on your legs. He's extremely strong with it, and he knows how to balance his energy out. He feels when he's expended too much energy, and he knows when to let it go. And that is honestly is one of the hardest things when it comes to becoming an MMA wrestler versus your old wrestling with college wrestling, is you got to know when to let go of the shot. You got to know when to know that you're expending too much energy, and he knows that.
In terms of his favorite kinds of takedowns, he does attack the legs. He's got some doubles where he'll pick up people when he presses them into the fence, which I guess is an MMA adaptation. But, you saw this, for example, in most of his fights, really, but certainly in the Tyron Woodley fight. He's got good body lock takedowns, too, doesn't he?
Yeah, he has extremely good body lock takedowns because he has the way he's built. He has really long arms, and his long arms they lock in, and when he has a strong, really strong grip too. So when he's able to get that grip on you, he just lowers it down to the fact where he's just attacking the hips. And in MMA or in wrestling in general, you want to get the legs, but primarily what you're looking for is you're looking to secure the hips. Once you got somebody's hips secured, there's really not much that you can do. And a lot of people don't really understand that. So when he goes to people, when he goes to that body lock and he has that hip locked in, they're going for a ride no matter what.
Is a guy like that in the training room? Obviously, he's very good, but in terms of what he's able to do for training partners, like, what would you say you were able to learn from training with Kamaru, other than beyond just intensity and discipline and that kind of a thing, like specific skills? What was one thing where he was really able to give you some sharpening moments?
Well, I mean, I talked about the wrestling, but I also, like to look at, some of his clinch work. Kamaru has some of the best clinch work, and he's very creative inside the clinch. Not only is he gonna just, drape that long reach around you with the arms locked, but he's also gonna shoulder bump. He's also gonna foot stomp. He's gonna do a lot of different things inside of there that makes you, feel like the fight is somewhere else. Once you feel like the fight is somewhere else, then boom, he's back where he wanted to be in the first place, which is with the takedown. And what I liked most about training with Kamaru is the fact that training just wasn't training for Kamaru. Training was always an opportunity for him to get better. Like whenever he trains, he comes, he shows up early, he stretches himself out, he does it right. Me, I used to just dust it off and just get up in there and go.
What do you mean? Like he had a more systemic approach?
Very systemic approach. He's very systemic. Like he'll come to practice, 30, 40 minutes beforehand just to warm up. Just to warm up. Now, mind you, we're going to warm up as a team, but he goes in there and he warms up. He warms up every single area, and he makes sure he's ready to go for practice every day.
To what extent have injuries plagued his career?
Injuries plagued his career quite a bit. He's always fighting through something. And that's part of what I'm talking about with him always on that grind. When you grind at that level on a consistent basis, your body pays a price for it because you don't allow yourself to have rest. And if I was to say there's one thing that he had to learn to do better, is he had to learn to rest. And it's a hard thing to do because nobody's patting you on your back for taking a break. You know what I'm saying? Mm. And that's what you have to really learn if you really want to bring the best out in how you feel when it comes to performing.
Okay, so part of the other skills that go just beyond the takedown are what he does with them. He does do some passing, but the big part is obviously got to be the ground and pound. And really, what's kind of interesting is, Habib is obviously a very special athlete, but he gets a lot of credit for a lot of the wrist rides. But there was a lot of guys who were doing wrist rides and hip rides. Ben Askren was doing them for a time. Chris Weidman was even doing them for a time. And certainly Kamaru Usman has as well. Can you describe his methods of control once he's got someone down?
Yeah, he goes for for his main focus. A lot of times he doesn't look to try to pass a guard. Sometimes he just operate out of that half guard position and just go for what they call a Dagestani handcuff, or just kind of find some way to isolate the guy where he's putting a lot of weight on one of his arms where it's not usable, where he has the ability to hit him and pop shot him. One thing that Kamaru does a lot is every practice, he always ends it with a serious ground and pound like session where he does 3 5-minute rounds of just hitting the bag and just punching the bag. And, it pays off big dividends because when you get used to just constantly hitting and punching and there's not a moment in between, you really start to feel comfortable in that space once you get somebody down to the ground, and you don't feel like you just need to hold them and grab them. With wrestling, you find that you can hit them with shots and then get into your position that you need to secure the position.
Yeah, two things come to mind when you think about that. One, I would imagine that if you're doing that at the end of practices, you're already tired, so you're able to find a gear where you can do ground and pound tired. The other one must be, I'm sure he's strong naturally. I'm sure if he went to the weight room, he would put up some impressive numbers. I would imagine though, in that particular kind of position, he must be crazy strong, right?
Oh man, he's ridiculously strong. He feel like Harambe or somebody. Like I'm telling you, man. Like he gets you down, and you think that he's holding on to something inside the cage or something, because it's just hard to get up, and he floats pretty well on top of you. So when you think that he's too anchored and you can just kind of flip him this way, he raises his hips up and he's able to float with you. So even if you're in a scramble or trying to go for something in jiu-jitsu wise, he's able to still stay out of trouble, but still be in control.
I mean, anything to say about his submission defense? You just don't see a lot of guys get his back. You don't see a lot of guys working from guard underneath. So that's obviously a lot of what he's doing, putting himself in a position where, those available weapons aren't there. And Gilbert Burns is no ordinary submission threat. But just in general, what would you say? He doesn't have to worry about it too much by virtue of positioning, or is there more to the story?
No, there's more to the story. One of Kamaru's first fights that I ever cornered him, he lost by submission. He got rear naked choke, and it was a fight that he was going to win comfortably, and he was going to destroy the guy. It was actually Alexis. It was who was it? Bruce Leroy's brother. It was Bruce Leroy's brother that beat him. And it was a big upset, but the guy got his back, and then Kamaru was being a little bit too relaxed because he wasn't worried about it, and then he got submitted. After that, you see Kamaru focus so much on just the jiu-jitsu aspect. He does a lot of gi training with George Santiago, and ever since that fight happened, he's really immersed himself in the areas where he was most weak at, which was some defending the submissions.
No doubt about it. Yeah, George Santiago, a important name. And what do you want to say? The 2000s era MMA had done a lot of good work. Is he's still teaching down there in South Florida?
Yeah, George is. He has a school called Excel, a little up north from where I live at, in West Palm area. And Kamaru, he goes up there and trains with him whenever he's in town. That's where Kamaru is training, because Kamaru still has a home here in South Florida, but he just goes out to Denver to train. But when he's here in town, that's where he's doing his training at.
What do you make of this idea they had to split the camp, where Gilbert stayed with Henry Hooft and Kamaru went over to Trevor Whitman? It's interesting. I've been watching some Trevor Whitman instructionals just during the pandemic, just to, see what they're all about, basically. I mean, the guy's got a lot of interesting ideas. No one would ever be able to say, oh, Trevor Whitman's a bad coach. No, I suspect he's quite a very good one. But what's better, to stay with the one that got you there, or mix things up and, get some new looks? How do you feel about something of a risk, I would say, Kamaru is taking in that regard?
Yeah, I think I would say always stick with the horse that got you there, right? You always want to stick with what you've been doing. But there was a little bit in Kamaru that was kind of feeling, even before this fight was announced with Gilbert, that he needed to switch things up a bit, and he was already kind of trying to feel like, he needed to add some more tools to his game. Because the style is a style. Henry Hu has a very, very good style, but at the same time, Kamaru was brought up in that style, and he was reaching a point where he was like, I love the style, but I want to add some things to it. I just don't want to just do this style. I want to add some things to it. So he was kind of already starting to just feel a little bit of disharmony in the whole, I guess, training marriage.
Hmm. All right, so let's talk about his striking. Now, that's obviously something he was able to showcase in the Colby Covington fight and in some other places as well. I think who was the other Brazilian guy he knocked out? It was Sergio Moraes he knocked out, right? So there's that as
Yeah.
well. But in general, it's not been necessarily what his go-to is. What would you say about his development as a striker? I mean, I think he played it smart, right? You use your best asset to get you to the big game, and then build this thing as it comes along. And then when it's really ready to deploy, then you use it. But what can you say about its development over time?
Well, I think it's gotten so much better. He's gotten so much more confident with just the flow of how he wants to fight. He has a very good style where he keeps the guys on what Greg Jackson calls the horns of dilemma, not making the right choice, being the fact that they're going to either defend the shot or they're going to take a punch. And the way that he mixes that up with his rhythm and movement off of a very stiff, fast, long jab is really good. It's really taking a weight class by storm, but he's been getting better and better just implementing that style and really learning how to even more throw different, leg kicks and all these different things that you wouldn't typically see a guy from his base start to do.
What would you say are some of his? Does he have punches like that? The jab you mentioned. Does he have punches that are like really his calling card?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, the jab, he has a very good uppercut. He has a pretty good just a straight right hand. He has a very powerful straight right hand. Um that he just, I feel like is underutilized, but when he throws it, it finds its mark. He also does well switching the stances pretty good, but for the most part, I like him to stay in conventional because I feel like that's where he's the most, defensively responsible as well too, as long with the striking. So he's got those punches, but with Kamaru, he's always in this flow and movement, and he's very patient in the way that he's fighting. He's not fighting in a hurry. He's taking his time because he knows that his gas tank is going to allow him to melt whatever he has in front of him, and then eventually that shot will present itself.
In terms of his footwork, and I'm guessing this might be somewhat injury related, also kind of size related. I mean, he's a huge welterweight, and then maybe he's doing it for other reasons related to strategy and technique. And this is not a criticism. I'm just saying it's an observation. He is, he's not like Wonder Boy, right? He's not bouncing up and down all the time. He's a little bit flat footed in that way. That's deliberate though, right? It's a call he's making about, if I need to shoot, I can be anchored to the ground. To your point, patience is involved there, right? You're not constantly making a hasty physical move. It's energy preservation. Would you call that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I would definitely say that. As a wrestling base calls for having a flat foot on the ground allows you to slide on the ground, having more contact on the ground. When you have bouncy feet, you kind of tend to come up a little bit on your toes a bit, and it kind of pulls you a little bit taller than you want to be if you want to go underneath for the guy. When you want to keep the guy not knowing if you're going to throw that big right hand or throw that crazy jab or just a fake, or go for a shot, you got to be able to keep your feet in constant motion, smooth sliding on the ground.
And the other part about Henry Hooft, I mean, now, obviously for this fight, you've got Usman working with Trevor Whitman, but before that, it's interesting. You've got Gilbert Burns, who's not a wrestler per se, but for grappling has very good wrestling, and other ones as well, like Michael Chandler. We just saw what he did over the weekend. Is Hoof's known as like a kickboxing guy, but it does seem like they're pretty good about taking these guys who, and I'm sure there's more people in the camp who have a role to play here. So maybe you could tell me about it. But if you're a wrestler and you want to, keep that in your back pocket and use those skills to really develop as a striker, it just seems like that's a great place to go. Why would that be the case? Like, what are they doing there to really nurture that particular kind of development?
Henry Hooft and the way that his mentality is for striking, it's just really just ingraining in the guy to go forward. No matter what, you're going forward. You can be getting your ass kicked in practice, and he's like, go forward. And it really, after a while, after you start just fully just getting into the system, you just learn to go forward. And as far as the ground aspect, they got one of the best wrestling legends of all time in Greg Jones at Sanford MMA. So that allows these guys to walk forward and still feel like they're going to be defensively responsible if the guy does take a shot and change his level. Greg is somebody that I brought in, and he's grown as a coach. He's grown with his understanding of how to make wrestling for MMA and still at the same time not get out of the basics of wrestling, which I was talking about earlier.
Okay, so we talked about size before. I do think that's a role to play here because I don't think. I mean, you never know. I don't expect Gilbert Burns to gas unless, Kamaru's really putting it on him. And then the gas tank might not even be the biggest concern he necessarily has there. But one thing I do think about is their size. Now, Gilbert previously was a 155er. Man, I couldn't imagine a scenario outside of cancer where Kamaru Usman could make 155 pounds. What is the size difference between them in your mind? How pronounced is it?
It used to be a lot more pronounced. I think that now that Gilbert has really taken to the weight class, he's starting to grow into the weight class. I've been seeing Gilbert, and he looks a lot stout. He looks pretty stout and just looks really strong. But not only, he's physically stronger too. So aesthetically, Kamaru may look like he's a lot bigger, but I think that Gilbert has definitely closed some of the distance with the size.
And how much experience do they have with one another? I got to tell you, there's a big concern I have with these two because, here's the thing. It's like you saw what Gilbert Burns did to Tyron Woodley. I mean, that was, and then whatever else he's done in his career, he's amazing. Kamaru Usman is known as sort of a work rate kind of guy over time. But if you have this much experience with the other guy, unless you have a real significant advantage in a particular area, my hunch is it might be a little bit conservative early.
You know, um, I think I think you're right in that assessment, but at the same time, I think the familiarity will allow these guys to maybe just pick up like they do in training. And watching them
Hmm.
in training is like watching two cats in a bag. They just go at it. You know what I'm saying? And they've been doing it for 6 years. They had some of the most epic battles in training. You know what I'm saying? Like they definitely had some brawls in training that were very close. They've helped each other get better in their weaknesses. Kamaru used to help teach a wrestling class, and he'll help Gilbert get better with his wrestling, and then Gilbert would in turn teach the jiu-jitsu class when the coaches were out of town, and he would help Kamaru get better. But then outside of that, those two would always find each other. They would always find each other in training with each other because they knew that it was going to be that kind of training, and they wanted to bring that out because they knew through each other that was the only way they were going to get better. So they sharpened each other's iron for sure. And to me, as somebody who's Kamaru is my brother, man. That makes me a little bit nervous about this fight, in particular, is because of the fact that they're so familiar with each other and they've been brought up together and they found who they were as fighters, in a sense, under the same roof. And it's interesting because it goes, the winner of this fight is the one who has made the biggest adjustment since the last time they trained.
Hmm. Um, Two stats I want to point out here that stand out to me as pretty relevant. One, Kamaru has a 76-inch reach to Burns' 71. Now, Burns is explosive and I think can cover that distance if he needs to. I guess my question to you would be, yes, a 5-inch reach advantage is probably relevant. My question would be, how relevant?
It's pretty relevant, and I'll look at the Dan Hooker fight as a reference for that. You seen Dan Hooker just pick Gilbert apart, and a lot of time it was Gilbert falling on the sword, and by that I mean sometimes when he has that style where he jumps in. He don't jab from the outside. He jumps in with looping shots a lot of the times, or he waits back and sits back and try to hit the counter. But those are hooking punches. You know what I'm saying? The hooks are not as long as straight punches. So at the end of the day, a straight puncher will always beat him to the punch if they're smart about the timing and where they place that punch. So, Gilbert can be over aggressive and fall on one of those punches. And I'll tell you right now, the hardest punch I ever got hit with was a jab from Dan Henderson that I did not see happen. And it was because I did exactly that. I fell onto my own sword. I jumped in and he threw a jab. It took me about 2 rounds to figure out what he hit me with, but it was a jab.
Interesting. The other one here, of course, would be the takedown numbers. The one that stands out is Kamaru has a 100% takedown defensive rate. I'm imagining you've seen people take him down in practice, but I'm guessing it doesn't happen a whole lot.
No, it doesn't happen a whole lot. Kamaru was super competitive no matter what. You can't tell him that it's just for practice and take him down. We would do these things at the end of every practice, at wrestling practice, just to mix things up to keep it fun. We would just have teams. One guy, one-sided, one team versus another team, and we'll separate them. And most of the time, it was Kamaru and Gilbert, the one who would always face off. So they would get into some tenacious, scrambling wrestling matches just for a takedown, and it will be crazy because sometimes Gilbert will get him, and then a lot of times Kamaru will get him. But it was Kamaru doesn't lose too much when it comes to wrestling and his takedowns.
So we've talked a lot about Kamaru here, with everything from his development to what he's good at to everything else. What's another factor, if there is one, that we should consider about Kamaru that could be relevant for this particular matchup?
I think training with Trevor Whitman. I think that training with Trevor Whitman is going to be one of those things that is going to pay off big dividends for him. And I say that because if you look at Justin Gaethje and you see the way Justin Gaethje was fighting at first, he was down to throw to 50-50 right in front of the guy. He hit me, I hit you. The harder shot lands. But something dramatically changed in Justin Gaethje. Now he starts getting off at angles, and now he knows how to hit those same powerful punches, but now he's at an angle. And when I look at Kamaru Usman and I look at his work with Trevor, there's a lot of angle work. There's a lot of footwork along the lines that allows him to get in position to still land a big shot and then transition to a takedown, or just being able to take his opponent to make them turn. Whenever you get an angle, you start throwing some punches, the guy's here, and then you over here. Now he has to turn around and reset. At that point, you're in charge of the motion, and you can either go for a takedown or continue to punch him.
Last thing on this, the fight against Jorge Masvidal, he won, but no one would call that his best showcase. It's sort of that John Jones OSP thing where you change last minute, and you're not fighting a scrub by any stretch of the imagination, but you just weren't prepared for this particular guy, and so everything kind of changed. I mean, what do you say about some of the criticism he got from that? It's, he was a little conservative and didn't do a whole lot. I mean, he did enough to win, but it wasn't powerhouse Kamaru, I don't think.
I thought it was a great fight, I think that the criticism is a bit undeserving, considering the fact that I think it was weighted in the fact that people just wanted to see Masvidal do more, when people want that, they just like, yeah, but he didn't do nothing. You know what I'm saying? And they don't want to put the blame where the blame really is. You know what I'm saying? They don't want to do that. So it's easier to blame Kamaru for the fact that the fight wasn't what it's supposed to be. Kamaru brought his end of the share. He dominated in the areas where he typically dominates at. At that point, it's up to the opponent to bring his share. And then at that point, then the battle is contentious. And then at that point, you see who's the better fighter. But Gamebred didn't bring it. Gamebred didn't bring the Gamebred. So I don't think that was on Kamaru.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens with this on February 13th at UFC 258. We'll have another discussion about Gilbert Burns, of course, because that's the other side of the equation, and a man there quite as well. But today was about Kamaru Usman, your existing reigning UFC welterweight champion, Hall of Famer, and CBS Sports Combat Sports analyst. It is the one and only Rashad Evans. Rashad, we'll check in soon again, and thank you for your time.
No problem, man. Talk to you soon.